Have you ever actually stopped to think about your morning routine? You wake up, you stretch, you stare into the abyss of your closet, and then you probably struggle to decide between two functionally identical shirts. We all do it. It's such a relatable, everyday moment. But biologically speaking, it is incredibly weird. So let's dive into this explainer, because clothing is wired so deeply into human behavior that we've literally written laws about how much of our own skin we're allowed to show in public. But why did this all start? And maybe more importantly, why did it start with us? I mean, just look at the rest of the animal kingdom. A cat never gets dressed. A horse doesn't put on a sweater. Even a raven, which is clever enough to solve puzzles that would totally stump most human adults, has never once looked at a frosty morning and thought, you know what, I should probably layer up today. We're the only ones who do this. So to understand this core paradox, we have to trace this fascinating trail of evidence that runs through ancient caves, glacial winds, and honestly, something a little more unsettling than your average wardrobe. All right, let's kick things off with section 1, the naked ape's dilemma. So before we figure out why we put clothes on, we really have to understand why we lost our natural coats in the first place. Let's step way back, hundreds of thousands of years into our biological history. Looking at our closest relatives brilliantly illustrates the sheer oddity of the human body. Think about this for a second. We are essentially the only sizable mammal walking around without a proper coat. We are completely out of place. Gorillas, fully covered. Chimpanzees, fully covered. Wolves, bears, elephants, they all drag a built-in heat-trapping coat through wildly different climates without a single complaint. And then, well, there's us, standing upright, practically smooth, looking like a creature that used to have fur and just completely gave up on it. Even our closest living relatives kept the fur that our common ancestors started with. So why did we lose it? Well, our ancestors took a very specific evolutionary path. They left the dense forest cover and moved out into the open grasslands to chase prey across really long distances. Now, in that environment, a thick fur coat was a massive liability. Overheating meant you collapse before the hunt was finished, and obviously collapsing meant going home with nothing. So to survive, our lineage traded fur for an absolutely absurd upgrade in sweat production. We carry somewhere between 2 to 4 million sweat glands. For pure cooling efficiency, we are, without exaggeration, built like endurance radiators. But as with any major biological shift, solving one problem created another one. Shedding our fur permanently exposed our bare skin to direct sunlight for the very first time. Biologist Nina Jablonski's research argues that once we lost that protective coat, natural selection had to completely rewire our skin pigmentation. Our biology had to find this perfect, delicate balance, protecting the body from severe ultraviolet damage while still letting in just enough sunlight to produce essential vitamins. Losing our fur didn't just change our look, it rewired an entire biological system around a body that was now totally exposed to the elements, which is totally fine in the blazing heat, but terribly dangerous when temperatures suddenly drop below freezing. Moving right along to section 2, the unlikely lice detective. Now, if we were so naked and vulnerable, when exactly did we decide to finally cover up? The biggest problem with answering this is that fabric rots, animal hides break down, woven fibers vanish completely from the archaeological record within just a few centuries. So we have exactly 0 fossilized early outfits to study. Scientists had to get pretty creative here, and this is where the explainer takes a slightly unsettling but absolutely brilliant turn. Meet the unlikely historian of human clothing, the louse. Back in 2003, a geneticist named Mark Stoneking, along with some researchers from the University of Florida, set out to trace the family tree of human lice. And here's the biology you need to know for this. Humans host 2 distinct kinds of lice. Head lice, which live up in your hair, and body lice, which specifically live inside clothing, tucked away into fabric seams. Body lice actually cannot survive on bare skin. They absolutely require fabric to breed and survive. So, here is the crucial breakthrough. Body lice branched off from head lice at the exact moment our ancestors started wearing clothes consistently enough to give a brand new parasite its own ecological niche. By running the genetic numbers, researchers found that this split happened somewhere between roughly 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Basically, the lice figured out we got dressed before we did. But check out the timeline here. Large-scale migration out of Africa into genuinely cold climates didn't really pick up until about 70,000 years ago. This completely dismantles that neat little assumption that we simply got dressed because we were cold. No, we were wearing clothes tens of thousands of years before we went anywhere freezing. Which brings us to Section 3, protection and social signaling. Okay, so if the thermometer wasn't the original driving force, what was? Let's investigate the true motivations behind humanity's very first outfits. There are two major working theories for why early humans started draping hides over their bodies long before the Ice Ages hit. Theory 1 is just basic physical protection. If you're walking upright through waist-high grass and harsh scrubland, tracking animals across rocky terrain, even a really crude wrap of hide creates a fantastic barrier against the blazing sun, thorny brush, and biting insects. It wasn't glamorous, but it was genuinely useful survival gear. But Theory 2, that's where it gets really interesting. Social signaling. Humans are deeply, deeply social creatures, completely obsessed with communicating rank and belonging. And we actually have solid evidence backing up this obsession with visual communication. Roughly 200,000 years ago, which is before the genetic evidence for clothing even begins, our ancestors were already using pigments like ochre for body decoration. The impulse to paint bare skin to signal a rite of passage or mourning or hunting success, it was already there. We needed to be read correctly by the people standing near us. So transitioning from decorating our bare skin with pigment to choosing a specific draped hide to wear, well, that's a remarkably small cognitive step. Let's jump into Section 4, the bone needle revolution. Now, for most of early history, these clothes were probably just functional drapes of hides tied together with sinew. But eventually, the climate did turn incredibly hostile, and clothing had to evolve from a crude drape into a highly engineered, life-saving technology. Around 50,000 years ago, the archaeological record shifts dramatically. Up in Denisova Cave in Siberia, researchers discovered a 50,000-year-old hollow bird bone needle. And listen, this wasn't just some blunt punching tool. It actually had a tiny drilled eye for threading sinew. Think about the pure design thinking happening right there. Someone imagined a tool that did not exist yet, and then used it to create controlled, repeatable stitches. This meant early humans could finally make fitted garments that were actually shaped to the body. And just in case you're wondering, modern science proves just how massive this technological leap was. Archaeologist Ian Gilligan actually ran heated mannequin experiments to test this exact thing. He tracked heat loss using modern sensors, comparing loose draped hides against tailored sewn clothing. The results? The tailored clothes drastically outperformed the loose drapes, especially in freezing winds. Fitted seams trap warm air directly against the skin, particularly around the wrists and the neck, which is where heat escapes the fastest. That tiny bone needle literally allowed humans to craft a portable second skin. And hey, we weren't the only ones fighting the cold. What's super fascinating is that multiple branches of the human family tree were arriving at strikingly similar cooperative solutions. Neanderthals were processing hides, using stone leather tools, and they already had these cold-adapted builds. Denisovans, hanging out in that same Siberian cave, were creating pierced ornaments specifically for symbolic garment decoration. Preparing hides to this level required real, deliberate planning and cooperative labor across entirely different human species. And honestly, this technology arrived right when we needed it the most. Between 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, the planet endured these brutal glacial cycles. It was so devastating that some estimates put the surviving human population at just 10,000 to 30,000 individuals worldwide. We came dangerously close to total extinction. The groups that survived and managed to spread into Northern Europe and Asia were, almost without exception, the ones equipped with fitted, sewn clothing. It wasn't a luxury. It was the literal difference between living and dying out completely. Finally, let's look at Section 5, the original fashion industry. So here is the thing that really separates human clothing from anything else in nature. If this were purely about survival, we would have found the single most efficient design for our climate and just stopped there. But we didn't. We immediately began weaving social meaning into our new portable second skin. Tens of thousands of years ago, humans collectively decided that a perfectly functional piece of fabric needed to say something. Garments began mapping to social rank. Priests and rulers dressed differently, the dead were buried in very specific garments, and in places like Zuzuana Cave in Georgia, researchers found microscopic flax fibers roughly 30,000 years old, and some of them were deliberately dyed with color. We began spinning plant fibers, dyeing them, and eventually, this very same impulse would finance massive global trade routes and entire empires. And you know, it all connects right back to you. Look at a priest's robe, a judge's gown, military uniforms, or even just the outfit you carefully choose for a job interview. None of that is about temperature control. It's about using clothing as a language. When you stood in front of your closet this morning, making a calculation about how you wanted to be read by strangers before you even said a single word, you were running the exact same ancient social software as that early humans signaling their status by the fire 90,000 years ago.
Getting dressed for the first time was never just about fashion. And it wasn't just about the cold. It was biology, climate, and status colliding all at once. We get cold, we get creative, we get dressed, and then we spend the rest of our lives insisting we have absolutely nothing to wear. It evolved from basic survival into our deepest sense of identity. So I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Knowing how deeply wired this is into our biology and our society, if you somehow could, would you actually ever go back and live completely without clothing? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the everyday things around you.